Have you or your family ever needed to go on vacation and started worrying about who was going to start taking care of your dog or your cat while you were away? Who was going to feed them? Who was going to take them out to the bathroom? Who was going to make sure that they weren't going to destroy your house while you were gone? Well, what if I told you that there all are already alternatives that would eliminate each and every single one of these problems? Today, I will be talking about our cold-blooded friends, bearded dragons, and why they make such phenomenal pets. First, I'll be covering their accessibility and their handling. Secondly, I will be covering their enclosure requirements. And lastly, I will be covering over their diet and their feeding schedules. So, first things first, bearded dragons are one of the most easily accessible and handleable reptiles that you can find on the market. They're going to live from around 10 to 15 years if you give them the right setup and the right enclosure. And they come in a wide variety of different morphs and colors, so you can always pick out the bearded dragon that stands out to you the most and it's the perfect fit for you. They range from as little as $50 up to $900 depending on whether or not you want to get a base bearded dragon or if you want to get something like an albino bearded dragon, which is only $900 simply because of how difficult they are to obtain in captive breeding. There just simply isn't a lot of numbers of them, which is why they're expensive. Bearded dragons are highly social, extremely curious, very friendly, very animated with their emotions, very docile, and extremely gentle. You're not going to get any injuries, not going to get bit. The worst that you would get is probably like a little scratch on your arm, but it's going to be no worse than a cat scratch. So, keeping that in mind, bearded dragons also like to be perched up on their owner's shoulder whenever you're going for a walk. They don't mind being handled. And if you guys have ever seen Harry Potter and you guys remember that one scene of the wizard having the bearded dragon on his shoulder, that's pretty much how they are in real life as well. Another cool thing that you could do with bearded dragons is walk them like a dog. You can put a harness and a leash on them as well. As long as there's no pesticides in the soil or the grass, you can take them out outside for a walk and just enjoy the day with them as well. So, I have a few reptiles, and honestly, there's not going to be a better reptile to handle than a bearded dragon, which is why I assure you they're the best reptiles to get for a beginner. Secondly, bearded dragons are native to Central Australia, which means that it's going to be a desert environment. So, the babies, when they first hatch, start off at 3 inches and little by little start gaining an inch to 3 inches a month up until a year later when they reach their full and entire size. So why this is important is because when they're a baby, you can get about a 40-gallon tank, and that'll be enough for it because it's only going to be about 3 to 9 inches. But you have to keep in mind that about a year later, it's going to reach its full size, which if it's a female, it's going to be 16 to 19 inches. And if it's a male, it's going to be 19 to 24 inches. So you want to make sure if you have a 2-foot long animal, you're going to want to at least give it a 4-foot long enclosure with 2 foot wide and 2 foot high, just to ensure that it has enough space and to go around its entire enclosure freely and without any stress. And although you see some pet stores like PetSmart housing these bearded dragons together, you have to keep in mind that these pet stores don't really know what they're doing because they don't specialize in these animals. Bearded dragons are extremely territorial, and they will try to dominate one and the other and oftentimes fight till injury or to the death. So do not house them together. Do not listen to PetSmart. First thing that is going to be very important is that because they are a desert animal, they are going to require a UVB bulb that's at least going to be 12% in order to ensure that it's getting the rays that it needs. The rays are extremely important because without the UVB, the bearded dragon's not going to be able to process vitamin D3. And what vitamin D3 does is help produce calcium in the body or in their body. And calcium is the same thing all the way around in humans and in bearded dragons. If you don't have calcium, you're not going to have strong bones. And which is why if you don't give them the proper UVB, they can get something called metabolic bone disease, which is extremely unfortunate because it causes deformities and brittle bones, and you don't want to see your animal suffering. So make sure you give them the proper UVB. Next thing that's going to be extremely important to keep is the heat. They are a desert animal, so they are going to need at least half of the enclosure to be a basking side, which sits at 104 to 107 degrees. On the other side of the enclosure, you can keep it a cool side from 71 to 77 degrees for the ideal temperatures, just in case he needs to bask and then cool off on the cold side. He always has the best of both worlds depending on whether what he wants to do and is in the mood for. Last things last to talk about that you need for the enclosure is going to be a simple LED light. Because they are in the desert, they're going to require a day and a night cycle. So giving them 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night just to make sure they're not so stressed out is going to help out a lot. Third and finally on the list is going to be their diet and their eating. So bearded dragons are probably the easiest reptiles to feed. And it comes to our surprise that yes, they eat crickets and mealworms, but bearded dragons can also eat things like apples, bananas, carrots, strawberries, grapes, raspberries, pumpkins, cabbage, and even surprisingly dandelions. So, how often should you feed them? If it's a baby bearded dragon, it needs to be fed at least once or twice a day, up until they start maturing a little bit more. Once they start maturing, then you can start feeding it every 24 to 72 hours. And although it's not exactly ideal to go on vacation and not feed your reptile, you have to also keep in mind that these reptiles in the wild are going to be perfectly fine without food for a few weeks because the food is not that accessible in the wild. So if you need to take that vacation, just keep in mind that they could go weeks or months without food. And it's going to not tear up your entire house, and it's not going to be a worry if you're going to go on vacation, which is why bearded dragons make an amazing companion and pet. Thank you.